Although if you're interested, you just may have the opportunity to ask him that question in an upcoming event. But anyway, I don't want to give it. But anyway, so when you mention creating other universes, would these be in our physical space, or are they more like computer simulation? So I want to ask the question: people, when you think about, indeed, the fact that we engineer materials, then it does automatically occur to people: are we engineered? Is the universe that we live in a simulation, an engineered simulation? And I thought maybe I'll give you a chance to talk about that.
Well, it seems far-fetched. I mean, it's a classic mistake to try to explain something in terms of something more complicated. And the laws of physics, as we know them, do not resemble the sort of things that emerge naturally from simple computer programs. They rely on the continuum, that space and time are continuous. They rely on symmetry principles that are very deep. They don't, computer code typically has lots of arbitrary features. If you look at Super Mario worlds, they have laws, but the laws are kind of whimsical, and they don't, they're different at different levels. And so, whereas the laws of physics that we know, you can boil down to very few principles that don't look like computer code. Now, you could ask yourself, what would it look like if the world were a simulation? How would we tell? And in principle, it's very hard to tell. But you would expect maybe that there would be errors occasionally, there'd be missing pixels in the world, or infinite loops that go crazy. But none of the world just doesn't look like that in any object.
But I mean, and there are two things that I can say you elaborate on. But one is that if it was a really perfect simulation, and you couldn't tell the difference, the answer would be, it doesn't really matter. We're physicists, we're just trying to figure out how the world works.
Yes.
And whether it's a simulation or not doesn't really matter, because
this kind of goes back to what we discussed before, this notion of absolute truth. Well, physics can aspire to absolute truth, but really that's not what we have or or can get. What we can find is things that are fruitful and work well or not. And so far, the idea that the laws of physics should be formulated as the program of a computer of some recognizable type has not been very fruitful.
Yeah, okay, I would agree. And the other thing that you hit, which I think is worth elaborating on, is in some sense it's the same as the question of God. Namely, people who say we need a God to create us don't often ask the question, do you need something to create God? But if you ask, are we a simulation, then you have to ask, as you say, it's not fruitful to talk about something more complicated.
Right.
Where the things that created us are simulation from something else, and if that was the case, does it go on, is it turtles on the top all the way down? And so the idea of saying we're in a simulation sounds nice, but it begs this huge question of what's the more complicated world that simulated us, and is it a simulation?
Right.
And that
so
doesn't
far,
seem to lead anywhere.
The version of cosmology, physical cosmology, that's proved fruitful and explained actual things about the universe and predicted things successfully and correlates a lot of information, is not based on anything resembling sacred texts that I know of. That doesn't mean that there couldn't be superior beings. It doesn't mean that there could be a God that just let things run this way. But it has not been a fruitful way of understanding the world that we actually observe.
Let me be a little more specific. People sometimes like maybe our new Secretary of Education, like to think that maybe evolution is too complicated, that the cells are too complicated to have been created by evolution, so they had to be created by a more complicated being. But then that begs the question: how did that more complicated being come in? If you really want to address these things, it's more useful to think about in terms of simpler things, which you can reduce, which is what productive up to now.
I mean, it's not inconceivable